With the introduction of 16-bit gaming consoles such as Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis, game developers were provided with more power, which in turn provided more options and genres. For example, the first time I remember playing a console fighting game was on Super Nintendo in late 1992. The game? Street Fighter II. I was lucky enough to have a buddy down the street with a Super Nintendo and a copy. Needless to say, I tried to move in. The graphics and gameplay were amazing. We would switch out between like 4 friends, playing for as long as our parents would allow. Trash talking and popcorn tossing. My friends and I had a blast with Street Fighter II, and it basically introduced me to the fighting game genre. Also in 1992, starting in October, a storm was brewing in arcades across America. An electric new fighter, Mortal Kombat, had been released and was gaining traction, grabbing attention from much more than just gamers because of its violence. Mainstream media outlets were sharpening their pitchforks in an effort to censor this game. My first experience with Mortal Kombat was a complete surprise and happened when I was 11. My mom had stopped at a worn-down gas station in town, and of course my bubbly buns walked in looking for a snack. What I found was a full-course meal that led to a lifetime appetite. From a distance, the cabinet was a mystery. I almost certainly remember it having no side art, simply featuring a generic wood overlay. Regardless, I put my thoughts of snacks on the back burner and rushed over to check it out. It was a game that I'd never heard of, a fighting game like Street Fighter, but it looked more realistic and felt more violent, the exact level of adult that this 11-year-old soul was searching for. I remember how amazing the live-action character bios were, seeing literally real-life depictions of the characters in action. Sub-Zero, Scorpion, Sonya, Liu Kang, Raiden with an eye, Johnny Cage, and of course, Kano. I remember seeing Goro for the first time. I was stunned, in fear of this four-armed monster that promised to make life hell. I was scared because the stakes were raised. A shower of blood following a roundhouse kick, uppercuts that send opponents flying, an announcer demanding you finish him after a win, a yellow and black garbed ninja with a skull under his mask, ready to torch a losing opponent, leaving nothing but a crumpled skeleton. I loved Street Fighter II and always will, but that day I knew that this was my game. This was Mortal Kombat. Needless to say, I begged my mom to bring me back to play more, and she did, a few times, which helped mitigate the long days leading up to the console release. Mortal Monday, September 13th, 1993. The game had an epic commercial that featured a crowd running through the streets, people screaming, "Mortal Kombat!" and it had me hyped, almost unable to wait for that glorious Monday. At this point, I was 12, and yes, my mom did let me play Mortal Kombat, and she got me the Sega Genesis version, which was actually better than the Super Nintendo version for a change. I only had a Genesis at the time, and it paid off with Mortal Kombat. I remember sneaking the instruction manual to school, putting it in my textbook so the teacher wouldn't see, reading cover to cover, over and over, hoping to find a secret or clue that I hadn't seen before. The characters and the lore of Mortal Kombat had captivated me in a way that few games of any genre had ever done before. The Genesis version of Mortal Kombat featured a blood code, which allowed all of the arcade's violence. ABACAB, or should I say ABACABB. This code changed the game. Literally, no code, no blood. No code? Censored fatalities. I was 12 and I was sick of censorship. This code was important, like Contra code important, especially considering that the Super Nintendo version replaced the red blood with gray sweat and absolutely ruined the fatalities, with no codes. This was one of the few times I remember the Sega Genesis besting the Super Nintendo, and it didn't stop with just the code. The Genesis version has much snappier gameplay, making the Super Nintendo feel slow and muddy in comparison. However, of course, the Super Nintendo version does have better visuals, features more voiceovers, and has unique idle animations for Sub-Zero and Scorpion. My first time playing the Super Nintendo version was at a friend's house, not long after release, and although I was interested in seeing the differences in better visuals, I was surprised how nerfed the game felt. Anything Mortal Kombat at the time was everything to me though, and I even competed in a small tournament hosted by my favorite local game store, Rhino Video Games in Gainesville, Florida, which unfortunately was eventually bought out and ruined by GameStop. Although I didn't win, I took second place and was awarded with sweet rental credit. I chose Raiden and was bested in the third round by Sonya. Once again, it was a small tournament, Super Nintendo version, and I was nowhere near pro at the game, but it still solidified another awesome life memory of Mortal Kombat. Little did I know, it was just the beginning. Sometime near January 1994, during an innocent lunch break in a middle school somewhere in North Florida, my buddy produced a magazine that once again changed my life. And it wasn't Playboy this time, it was Electronic Gaming Monthly, and on the cover was Mortal Kombat 2.